One miracle after another. The Pavel Goya story. Chapter 9. I will give nations for you. The whistle is probably blowing just about now, Pavel sighed, looking at his watch. The southbound train would be leaving without him. How he had dreamed about this moment. His time in the military had finally come to an end. He should have been experiencing real freedom at this very moment, with the wheels of the train already rolling beneath him. But here he was, confined to his barracks for one more day. Anxiously looking forward to the end of their term in the military, the soldiers had been checking off the calendar for the past 100 days. With 90 days checked off, they determined each of the last 10 days should be celebrated. As a grand finale, the soldiers engaged in one long night of intoxicating revelry. Some of the drunken celebrating had reflected very negatively on the military. As a final lesson from the military, the colonel decided to punish them by restricting them to their barracks for an extra day. Now, here they sat on their bunks, staring at the clock ticking away 24 more hours. No one was allowed a single privilege, not even a phone call home. Their families would no doubt be traveling to the city to greet them as they got off the train. But they wouldn't be there. Instead, they were aimlessly shuffling about the barracks. This isn't fear, Pavel thought to himself. I had no part in their drunken debauchery and reckless behavior, but I am being penalized along with those who were guilty. He knew Dana would be waiting for him. He had called her with the number of the train and the time it would arrive. What if she thinks I made other plans because I don't care about her anymore? His tormenting thoughts went from one possibility to another, each adding to his misery. It was one of the longest days of his life. Early the next morning, Pavel and the rebel soldiers were loaded into military transport trucks to be taken to the train station. The commanding officers were taking no chances that they would be embarrassed by another last-minute stunt from these soldiers. They personally escorted them onto the train. At the sound of the whistle, they all breathed a sigh of relief. The wheels began to turn beneath them. They were free at last. Pavel prayed as the train clicked along the tracks. He couldn't wait to see Dana. She must be wondering why he had not been on the train the day before. If only he could talk to her. As the train wound its way back up the steep Retezat mountain pass, it felt as if it was going slower than ever. The air coming through the window did little to cool him from the hot summer day. Why was this last trip home taking twice as long as all the others? He just wanted to hurry up and get home and take off his uniform. Never had Turnu Severin looked so good. From his window, he could see the busy city bustling with activity. Nothing had changed. As the screeching wheels came to a halt, he wasted no time grabbing his bag and jumping from the train. He was on his way home. Phew, it's hot, he said, wiping the beads of sweat from his face. Trying to jog with his full duffel bag was hard work with the summer sun beating down on the pavement. Even though he was hot and sticky, the thought of stopping for a rest never entered his mind. But which route should he take through the city? He had walked at least a dozen different ways from the train station to his home in the past. Deciding on one of the most direct routes, he headed for the city center. Crowds of people overflowed the sidewalks, spilling into the streets. Every one of the 250,000 men, women, and children in Turnu Severin must have decided to come shopping on the same day, he thought to himself, while trying to navigate his heavy bag amid the jostling crowd. The closer he came to the city center, the more congested it got. Arriving at the marketplace made forward progress nearly impossible. The market occupied 4 city blocks, filled with shops and vendors, all trying to entice customers at the same time. The smells from the street vendors' simmering pots were at times overpowering. More of them did more to repel him than to lure him for a sample. As he looked past the sea of humanity in which he was presently engulfed, his eye caught sight of a familiar figure. "This is impossible. In the middle of all these people," he thought. As she stepped out into the street, she saw him. His heart skipped a beat. Walking directly toward him was Dana. What are the chances of this happening, he thought. Just a minute or two earlier or later for either of us, and we would have completely missed each other. Spontaneously, they leaped forward, running for the long-awaited reunion. With tears of joy running down their cheeks, they stood just staring into each other's eyes. Smiling through his tears, Pavel related his countless dreams. Night after night, he had pictured her face as he lay on his cot. Dana was even more beautiful than he remembered. "I'm so glad you still care about me. I thought for sure you had gone home another way to avoid me," Dana said through her tears. "Care about you? I couldn't imagine my life without you." Dana continued, "I wanted to surprise you yesterday with a real welcome home. I came to meet you wearing my new dress and your favorite perfume. I even baked you some cookies. When you didn't get off the train, I thought maybe you had missed the early train, but would be coming on the evening train. But when you didn't get off that one either, I cried all the way home. I felt as if you were avoiding me." "Oh, Dana, don't ever think those thoughts again," he said, wiping a warm tear from his cheek. They walked and talked for a long time without any real destination. Dana smiled as he recounted the ways her prayers and letters had strengthened him. Many times, she had sent exactly the Bible verse or inspirational quotation he had needed to help him with the difficult situation he was facing. God had truly used her to bless him. Arriving home began another wonderful reunion. The smells coming from the kitchen emanated from something else he had been dreaming about: real food. As his family enjoyed a wonderful meal together, Pavel shared with them the way their prayers had strengthened him while he was in the military. Nothing short of a series of miracles could have allowed him the freedom to worship God week after week while serving in a communist army. Together, they thanked their loving Father in heaven for his many acts of kindness on Pavel's behalf. After only 6 weeks' rest from the army, it was time to begin his classes at the university in Bucharest. How thankful he was that his father had a good job. Most of the students had to crowd into dormitories. A few of the students, coming from families with better incomes, rented small apartments, sharing the rent with other students. Pavel was one of the few having an apartment all to himself. Having money for rent, food, and a little to spend besides, he knew he had it a lot better than most. He even had money for taxi rides to and from school. Most students were happy if they had money for bus fare. He felt as if he was set. However, one major obstacle remained. His classes were scheduled for 6 days a week. It appeared he was about to revisit the Sabbath challenge he had faced in the military. There were no exceptions or clauses to the attendance policy. A student who missed 16 periods received a warning. In the event that 21 periods were missed, a second warning was issued. After 26 absences, the student was expelled for a semester. If more absences followed, the student was permanently expelled. With classes each day, it was not difficult to see that Sabbath observance would be a real problem. After just 4 weeks, he would have 16 absences. There appeared to be no way he could complete a full semester without being expelled. But God had been faithful thus far. He decided he would just have to trust him 1 week at a time. The classes were extremely challenging. All the professors taught as if their class were the only one. He had experienced homework in high school, but it certainly did not compare in any way to this. Each of his textbooks looked more like exhaustive dictionaries than a text for a single subject. From the first day, he diligently applied himself, scoring nearly perfect in every subject. His fellow students and teachers alike respected his aptitude and pleasant spirit in the classroom. For the entire first semester, he attended church without experiencing a problem. When he returned to class after his weekend absence, to his surprise, no one said a word. At times, the other students told him the teacher had forgotten to take roll. Other times, a roll would be taken, but the professor would forget to turn it in. It seemed nobody else had noticed that the attendance variations only occurred on Saturdays. Because he was such a good student, it was assumed he must have been sick or had some other valid reason for missing class. Each morning, Pavel thanked God for his faithfulness to him. His providence was making it possible for him to remain in school. Moving hours away from his home church meant finding another in Bucharest. Soon after joining the church that his friend Piti attended, Pavel could see that this group's need was the same as that of all the others. They desperately sought printed materials. Only a few had Bibles, and even fewer had lessons with which to participate in group Bible study. Someone would have to attempt to make copies for the others. It would be risky business. If they were caught, it would mean a lengthy prison sentence. The government had such tight control on all printed material that a permit was required to own a typewriter. For them to obtain the permit, a typewriter needed to be registered. The type on each of the government typewriters had unique characteristics, making it possible to trace every document. Each typewriter had its own fingerprint or DNA of sorts. If contraband materials were discovered, the type easily identified its origin. With the constant threat of informers, printing religious materials was extremely dangerous. From time to time, typewriters from other countries could be purchased on the black market. Pavel was told he would be provided a safe machine if he would be willing to do the copying for the church. Praying for God to protect him, he agreed to use his apartment as the temporary print shop. Emptying most of the contents from his largest closet, he soundproofed the door and the walls the best he could using pillows and blankets. His closet was now the nerve center of the illegal operation. It was imperative that the sound of typing should not be heard during the night, as the Secret Service police looked very kindly on tenants who reported such sounds coming from a neighbor's apartment. His schedule now completely full, he began work in his secret print shop, typing out copies of Bible lessons. Typing with 8 or 9 sheets of carbon paper was much slower than typing with a single sheet of paper. Each depression of a key required very deliberate contact in order for the last copy to be legible. It was tedious work, but without it, the congregation had almost nothing in print. For several months, everything went smoothly. His studies were going well, and the people were thrilled to have new materials to study. Many days, Pavel sought to stay awake in class. Trying to keep up with his double life allowed for very little sleep. He thanked God as he worked through the long night hours that he could sacrifice his sleep so that others could get to know him better. Though he was exhausted, he praised God for the privilege to honor him. On his way home from university one afternoon, he saw one of the church leaders approaching him. As he passed him on the sidewalk, the leader furtively pressed a small piece of folded paper into his hand. Understanding the system, Pavel continued toward home as if nothing had happened. Once inside the privacy of his apartment, he opened the paper and read the message. Carbon copies discovered. Return machine. Within a few minutes, the print shop closet was dismantled and restored to normal. Very discreetly, the typewriter was moved back to its owner for hiding. That was too close, Pavel thought, returning to his apartment. We'll have to find another way to copy materials. Typing will be out of the question for a long time. Mingling casually with the other students, he asked, "Where can I find a copy machine?" "Sorry, the government controls every one of them," they informed him. With the government controlling the copy machines, he would have to try to think of another way to make copies. There must be a way. A few days later, his walk was interrupted by the grandeur of one of the city's largest buildings. As an engineering student, he began to study the architecture of the massive building. "I wonder what the stress factors are on those load-bearing points," he said, as he studied the building. "And what must the dimensions of the foundation be under those giant columns?" His mind continued as he thought back to the blackboard filled with formulas. His self-appointed assignment as chief engineer of the structure before him was interrupted by a musical voice greeting the guard at the entrance. Glancing over in the direction of the gate, he spotted the source of his interrupted thoughts. A professional-looking woman with a beautiful smile was being admitted through the security gate by the guard. As Pavel turned to walk through the gate, his eye caught sight of her name tag. "You have a pleasant disposition, Maria," he whispered to himself as if personally addressing her. She continued her pleasant spirit, humming a little tune as she continued her walk toward the building. Ministry of Agriculture Building, Pavel read just over the door Maria was about to open. Watching her disappear inside the building, Pavel said, "I wonder if..." Without finishing his sentence, he quickly made his way to the flower shop a couple of doors down. This time, it was Pavel's turn to greet the guard. Presenting himself, composed and in charge, he said with a smile, "I brought these for Maria." "May I see your ID, please?" the guard asked, disarmed by the moment of romance displayed before him. "Is she waiting for you?" "Well, look at what I have for her. What do you think?" Pavel replied with a twinkle in his eye. The guard eyed Pavel steadily for a long moment, then asked, "Do you know how to get to her office?" Pavel moved his head up and down, and the guard let him in, with no more questions asked. This time, it was Pavel, walking up the sidewalk to the large entrance door. "Lord, please be with me," he prayed, not having a clue how he would find Maria once he was inside. I wonder how many other Marias work in this building, he thought, looking down the long corridor. Where do you think you're going? Questioned a guard, quickly approaching from behind. I've come to see Maria. Oh, okay, that's her office over there. Knock on the door and she'll open it. Pavel knocked on the door. Thankful the guard had continued on down the long corridor. The kind woman he had seen a few minutes earlier opened the door with a puzzled look on her face. Ushering him into her office, she asked, "Who are you?" "My name is Pavel. I'm a university engineering student. Please listen to me for just a minute. What I've come to ask you is very dangerous. You can either risk your life for those of us who need your help, or you can call the guards and put me and my family behind bars for the rest of our lives." Totally mystified, she asked, "How on earth did you get in here anyway?" She could not help smiling as she listened to the drastic maneuver the young man had just pulled to gain an audience with her. "You're a pretty smart young man," she laughed. "It was nice of you to bring me flowers. That doesn't happen every day. Now tell me, what is this all about?" "Our church needs printed materials to use for the weekly Bible study class. You have a copy machine, and I have an original with me. I'm hoping you will make copies for us." All expression left her face. In total silence, she stood staring at Pavel, realizing what he was asking. As the personal consequences of the request washed over her, the blood rushed to her face, replacing the ashen color with red. Realizing what had just been said, she quickly reached for the cushion on her chair. Wrapping it around the phone on her desk, she whispered, "I hope no one has heard us." In quiet but very serious tone, she responded, "If I were to do as you ask, I would not only lose my job, I would never see my family again. I'm not willing to risk everything in my life for the copies you need. You don't have to worry though. I'm not going to put you in jail. Just leave and never mention to anyone that you came here." "I see you don't trust me," Pavel pressed. "I don't trust anyone in this country. You never know who is an informer and who isn't. Informers get paid well, and everyone needs money. Think about it for a moment. If I risked my life coming here, do you think I would talk when I leave? It wouldn't be just you going to prison. I would go too. I give you my word before God, I'll never talk. I'm sure you mean what you're saying, but everyone talks if he's beaten long enough. You can be sure they would torture you and beat you to death if they had to. They know how to make people talk. I would rather die than talk. Oh, I don't know what to do. Let me think about it." The next day, Pavel returned to her office. Without waiting for her response, he handed her the little devotional book, Steps to Christ. "We also need copies of this book," he said, as though she had already agreed. "I must be crazy, but I'm going to try it. You gave me your word before God that you would never say a word about this to anyone, and I don't know why, but I'm going to trust you." Making a few copies each day to avoid using quantities of paper at any one time, she began. At the end of her shift, she took the copies to her home for safekeeping. When Pavel met her at the end of the month, she had a small suitcase full of Bible study lessons and copies of the little book, Steps to Christ. Both of them knew that the next step would be equally dangerous. Anyone carrying a suitcase would be suspicious. Without a doubt, a suitcase would invite a search. They wrapped the pages in some dirty laundry. Saving the best laundry as frosting on the cake, they strategically covered the laundry with dirty diapers. Earnestly thanking Maria for risking everything for his congregation, Pavel stepped out into the street, praying that he could make it through the city without being discovered. Within a couple of blocks, he was spotted by the police. "What do you have in your suitcase, young man?" demanded the police officer. Smiling as if the officer was in for a surprise, he offered, "See for yourself." His casual demeanor greatly disarmed the officer as he zipped open the top of the case. "Phew! I see what you mean. I've seen enough," he said, closing the case with arms fully extended. The church members were overjoyed as Pavel distributed the dirty laundry among them. They would be studying the Bible from study guides provided by communist copy machines. The first semester came to an end with Pavel at the top of each of his classes, and the church members rejoicing in the Lord. However, he knew he would face a whole new set of challenges when his classes resumed. Each class would have a new professor. The grace he had enjoyed the past semester could not be assumed for this one. He was acutely aware that meeting the university attendance policy would simply be impossible if he was true to the Sabbath. Returning for the new semester, he discovered to his dismay that he had been assigned 2 professors he knew would be exceedingly challenging. One of them had rightfully earned the reputation of being the most difficult to deal with in all the university. As a personal agenda, she made it her policy to teach students the real meaning of respect. If she had ever smiled, it had not been witnessed. She was hard-nosed and proud of it. Her students would either toe the line or be shipped out. That's all there was to it. The other noted professor had a reputation with an entirely different motif. Caring very little if his students learned anything or not, he had discovered a way to sweeten his salary significantly. Everything in his class revolved around bribes or gifts, as he called them. Students who understood the gift system enjoyed unlimited privileges. He had a pleasant personality and a good sense of humor, but the students knew that they had better keep the gifts coming or they would find themselves on the losing side of things. Both of these unique teachers made it clear that they had a no-nonsense policy when it came to attendance. A student who missed was out. At least with one of them, a timely gift would no doubt solve an absence in one of the classes. With these new professors, Pavel could see that it wasn't going to be the same as his previous semester. The attendance would definitely be submitted each day. All week, Pavel prayed for courage and wisdom. He didn't know how God would work it out this time, but he resolved to be faithful. On Sabbath, he joyfully joined the morning worship service instead of attempting to please his professors. Returning to class following the first weekend, he was met by the steel gaze of his hard-nosed professor. Facing him, she went straight to the point. "You missed my class last Saturday. If you do it again, I'll drop you." Her speech finished, she turned and walked back to the front of the classroom. Just seeing the look on her face inspired him to pray all week. The next period, he received another special greeting. The smile on the professor's face helped, but the speech following was not all that encouraging. "You missed my class last Saturday. I think I made myself quite clear on my attendance policy. However, you still have the opportunity to keep me happy, if you know what I mean. I've been known to be fairly tolerant under the right circumstances," he said, smiling. After a couple days, without receiving anything from Pavel, he approached him a second time. "You seem to be disregarding my suggestion. Perhaps I need to clarify myself. It's really quite simple. Either you do what it takes to please me, or you will discover a side of me that I guarantee you won't like. If you think you're going to get anywhere in my class without my approval, you're wrong. Let me put it to you like this. As the teacher, I hold the knife, and I can slice the bread any way I choose. You had better decide in the future to make me happy." Pavel responded, "Please, listen to me for just a moment. Some of your students come to every one of your classes, but they never learn anything. It seems to me the reason we are in school is to learn. Isn't the whole idea to know the material at the end of the class? I learn, even though I miss Saturdays. If you check my grade point average, you will see I'm a perfect student. What is the big deal if I don't come to class on Saturdays? If I miss something important, the other students gladly share their notes with me. Right now, I'm not just caught up in your class, I'm ahead of your assignments. You really don't listen well, do you? I don't care if you learn a thing in my class or not. If you don't come with a gift after an absence, you'll be in real trouble. If you miss again next week, you'd better have an extra special gift. I hope you understand me this time." His smile was gone. There was no mistaking it. He was serious. With two professors bearing down on him about his Saturday absences, it was hard to dismiss the subject from his mind. Throughout the week, shadowy doubts came from time to time, attempting to steal away his peace. He knew the enemy would love to break his bond of confidence in God. Refusing to entertain the prospects of doom, he increased his time reviewing promises in God's Word. Through his seasons of prayer, he drank in fresh doses of courage and power to keep trusting his Heavenly Father. Because this experience had become so personal, his devotional life continued to be the most important part of his day. God had not let him down so far, and he was certain there was no reason to stop trusting him now. Returning to school after missing another Sabbath was not something he was looking forward to. But after spending an early morning in prayer, he felt the familiar peace of God's presence surrounding him. With his head up, he made his way back to class. With God by his side, he would bravely face whatever came. Soon after arriving on campus, he learned that both of his difficult teachers had met to discuss his absences. That before he had arrived for class, they had already met with the dean of the university to report his repeated absences. The dean was known to be even harder to deal with than the two professors. He was a respected member of the Communist Party and had a great deal of power and influence. His loyal support of the government caused anyone having to deal with him to treat him with the utmost respect. As Pavel entered the dean's office, he was greeted by an orderly arrangement of his attendance records on his desk. "Mr. Goya, please have a seat," the dean said. continuing to survey the records. Upon review of your records from the previous semester, I see a highly unusual pattern. I have never seen such a display of incompetence in record taking at this university. But from the attendance sheets that have been completed, I see you have 34 recorded absences, he stated without showing emotion. Looking up from the attendance records, the dean looked Pavel in the eye. In a polite but dignified manner, he continued, I know you're an Adventist and that you don't believe in attending school or work on Saturdays. But let me remind you that in this country, there is no God. Attending school on Saturdays is not an option. It's policy. There is no way you can continue your education and take off Saturdays. You'll have to choose between your education and your religion. Pausing for a moment to let the real import of his words sink in, he studied Pavel. These will be the terms for your continuing education, not just in our university, but for any in the country. This coming Saturday, you'll be in your classes. I don't care what you do once you get there. That's up to you. If you want to put your head down and sleep, that's up to you. I don't care if your grades are good or bad. Just be in your classes. If you come to class, we'll forget this meeting ever took place. If you don't come, you'll be expelled. Consider this your final warning, he said with emphasis. Making sure his subject was clearly understood, he ended with an ominous promise. If you cross me, you'll never attend another day of class in your life. Sir, if you will listen for just a moment, I think you will better understand my position, Pavel pleaded. Just turn around and get out of my office. I have no more time for you. First of all, this God you worship has never been seen by anyone. He doesn't exist. Second, I'm not going to risk my job for you. And last, I think it's stupidity to believe in God. School is more important. It is your future. End of discussion. Standing to his feet, he turned and busied himself with a document. Seeing that the possibility for further discussion was out of the question, Pavel stood to make his exit. Leaving the dean's office, he walked in silence. His destiny appeared to be hanging in the balance. If he remained faithful to God, hope for an education would be out of the question. The next day, Pavel went to pay the dean's secretary a visit, hoping he would have an opportunity to explain his position. Can I help you? The secretary asked. Is there any way I can get in to see the dean? You must be Pavel Goya. I've heard all about you. As far as getting in to see the dean, you are just wasting your time. Your case is a closed subject in his mind. Listen, she continued. Why don't you just come to school this Saturday and pray at your desk? You said that the Bible says not to work on the Sabbath. You wouldn't be working, just worshiping here instead of at church. I just couldn't come to school on Saturday without going against my conscience, Pavel earnestly explained. I'll be going to church this Saturday. Well, I guess it's your choice. But it seems a shame that someone with your talent and intellect would throw it all away. And for what? Realizing that further discussion was pointless, Pavel left the office. With each passing moment, the end of his education appeared to draw nearer. Night and day, he prayed to remain strong and courageous. Surely God still has a plan. He wouldn't have blessed me all the way through the military only to forget me now, he reassured himself. The next day, Pavel returned to the secretary's office, hoping she would allow him to defend his case. She seems like a nice woman. Perhaps she will have a little heart and listen to me, he thought. Without waiting for her to begin the conversation, he began to plead his case. Why would you be a part of ruining my life? I came to school to get a good job. If I get good grades and learn all my lessons, why do you care if I attend on Saturdays? There really isn't any point in discussing this again. I'm afraid it's too late for words. Everything has been decided. As I said before, the only chance you have to get an education is to forget your extremist ideas. Why don't you just admit that you're being a fanatic? Leaving the administration office, Pavel returned to his second period class. Meeting him at the door, the professor began. I told you what to do to keep me happy, and you didn't do it. Now, you're going to suffer the consequences. Who do you think is going to save you from the communist regime? Your God that doesn't even exist? If there were a good God, he wouldn't mind you getting an education. But it's all irrelevant since there isn't one. With the words of administrators and professors alike ringing in his ears, Pavel found it difficult to concentrate in class. For the next 2 days, he spent more time praying than listening to lectures. During Wednesday night, sleep just wouldn't come. Earnestly he began to pray. Lord, I realized my motivation for coming to this university was pride. I wanted to be someone important, with a degree, someone people respect. I wanted the prestige of being able to say I'm an engineer. What is going to happen to my dreams and my future? On and on through the night, he pleaded with God, hoping to convince him to work in his behalf. The longer he prayed, the more frustrated he felt. It just didn't seem as if God were listening. After increasing the earnestness of his pleadings and not experiencing the peace he was seeking, he ended his prayer feeling discouraged and forgotten. He stared for some time into the darkness. Searching for something to read that would bring relief to his soul, he picked up a small devotional book and began to read a portion he had previously underlined. Scanning the page, his eye caught sight of just the answer he had been seeking. 2 or 3 thoughts seemed to jump off the page at him. When we pray, we need to trust God with the outcome. We need to allow Him to work as He sees best. We dare not put self at the center of our requests. We should always put God first and let Him decide what is best for us. Like a flash, he suddenly could see. He had been trying to convince God to answer his prayers his way, instead of accepting God's will for his life. Realizing the selfishness of his past prayers, he began to pour out his heart again. Lord, I'm willing to give up school, my future, and my degree. I don't care anymore. You just work in the way that will bring honor to your name. I'm choosing your honor above my wants and desires. The moment he surrendered his will to God, the peace he had been seeking returned. No longer feeling anxious about the outcome of his education, he fell asleep. The next day, as he arrived at the university, he was greeted by the secretary. Have you decided to attend classes this Saturday? She inquired. No, I won't be here, Pavel replied calmly. But let me tell you about three heroes in the Bible. They were asked to compromise their faith. They wouldn't bow down to the king's statue when the command was given, even though they faced certain death. They could have bowed down with the others, pretending to tie their shoes, but they didn't. They stood tall for God. When the king confronted them, they told him, "Our God is able to save us, but even if he does not, we will not bow down to your statue." In a fit of rage, they were thrown into a fiery furnace. The king stared in amazement, seeing them walking around unharmed in the blazing furnace. And when they came out of the fire, they didn't even have a singed hair on their bodies. Looking earnestly into the eyes of the secretary, he said, "God can save me if he chooses. But even if he doesn't, I'm not going to attend class on Saturday. I would rather forfeit my education and future than betray my God." In disbelief, she said, "You have really lost your mind. I admire your courage and determination, but there is no God. What God can save you from a communist regime? I'm sorry, but there's no one who can save you now." "It's obvious that you don't know God," Pavel responded sadly. As she turned to walk away, her words of defiance and denial of God's existence continued to ring in his ear. "Lord, she isn't challenging me now. It's you she's challenging. And I really did mean it when I told her it doesn't matter what happens to me. It isn't that important anymore. But Lord, don't let your name be dishonored. I know you are able to show her that you are a powerful God and that a proud communist regime is nothing compared to you." As Pavel prepared for bed that night, he knew his destiny would be decided that Saturday. But he no longer felt anxious for his future. He still felt the gift of peace he experienced the moment he surrendered his plans to God. Laying his head on his pillow, he repeated the words of a favorite psalm. "In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." Psalms 4 and verse 8. The next morning, Pavel began his walk to school, knowing that it might be his last. Now he is more curious to see what God would do than fearful of the harsh reality of being expelled forever. He didn't have long to wait. The secretary of the university was now the one pacing nervously. The moment she spotted him coming up the sidewalk, she hurried to meet him. He had never seen her composure so shaken. Her ashen face gave her the appearance of being more dead than alive. Something was definitely wrong. "Pavel, do you know anyone in the government?" she blurted out. "No, I don't. Why do you ask?" Without answering, she continued, "Do you know anyone in the Central Committee?" "No." "Then do you know Cisasu?" "No, of course not. How would I know the president?" "Are you positive you're being honest with me?" she asked earnestly. "Yes, I'm being totally honest. Why do you think I would know anyone in the government?" Shaking her head in disbelief, she whispered more to herself than Pavel, "Then there is a God. For 21 years I've worked at this university. Never have I seen the government take an action like this." She explained, "This morning, the university received a mandate from the government with the president's signature, canceling all Saturday classes for the entire country effective today." The letter stated that the government was canceling classes in an attempt to help the ailing economy by conserving energy. If this law would have come on Monday rather than today, you would have been expelled from school for the rest of your life. There is no one who could have saved you. There must be a God after all, she stated breathlessly. Pavel felt as if he was standing on a cloud as the realization of the amazing miracle God had just worked in his behalf began to sink in. Let me share one of my favorite promises from the book of Isaiah, Pavel said, seeing a window of opportunity. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you, for I am the Lord your God. Isaiah 43, verses 2 and 3. Smiling at the secretary, Pavel said, over and over, I have experienced God keep this promise for me. But now the verse just below these have an altogether new meaning. Listen and see if you don't agree. Because you are precious in my sight, and I love you, I give nations in exchange for you. Verse 4. Bursting with excitement, Pavel said, isn't it amazing? God has given our nation just for me. The visibly shaken secretary turned abruptly and walked away. There was nothing more to say. Returning to classes the following Monday, Pavel realized the new law had done nothing to soften the position of his teacher, determined to teach him a lesson for failing to play by his gift rules. As Pavel entered his class, he met him more determined than ever to follow through with his designs. No gifts, no class, Goya. Every day, he became more incensed by Pavel's presence. His unwillingness to yield to his demands would not be tolerated. His defiance was undermining his authority. Standing before the entire class, he gave Pavel his final ultimatum. If you meet me here just one Saturday, you can continue in this class. But if you refuse, I'm not going to let you take your exams. After a visit with the dean, the teacher was required to admit Pavel into his class. This didn't really help the situation, though. Every test and quiz came back to his desk with an F grade. The teacher then announced his decision to terminate his failing student. He was not about to let Pavel off his blacklist. He would soon be gone. As the dean listened to Pavel's plight, he couldn't believe that one of his professors would act in such an unprofessional manner. This is impossible, he said in disbelief. After reflecting on Pavel's situation, he informed him that the matter was out of his hands and that he would have to file an appeal with the County Educational Commission. To be examined by the commission meant defending a subject before a board with both oral and written questions. Very few agreed to undergo the process. They would be examined, not only on the subject matter covered in class, but also from any source the examiners chose. Pavel had no other choice. If he was to continue his education, he would have to stand before the commission. Pavel's scheduled examination day left him just a few weeks to prepare. Going to the library, he checked out every resource he could find. Within weeks, he finished textbooks designed as semester courses. Chapter by chapter, he prayed his way through each book. His day of reckoning finally came. Standing before the panel of dignitaries, he was questioned first from one position then another. During each question, he sensed God blessing his mind with comprehension and clarity, enabling him to answer with confidence. Finally, The long, grueling process was over. The panel of professionals appeared fascinated with the student they had just examined. "You have answered every question perfectly," they assured him. "This commission has not encountered anyone quite like you before. We would like to ask you one final question, not as part of the exam, but out of curiosity to observe your ability to problem solve. In Bucharest, we have been studying a problem with the sewer systems." After explaining the problem in detail, they asked Pavel how he would rectify it. The answer came to his mind, just as the answers in the exam had. Without hesitation, he explained the solution to the problem. For a few moments, they just stared at him in silence. Finally, one of the examiners said, "The two best architects in Bucharest just arrived at the same conclusion after studying the problem for 6 months. You just gave us the answer immediately." The professor refusing Pavel admittance to his class also had to endure the day in the examining room. After praising Pavel for his excellent answers, the panel turned to the professor for a few questions. He was definitely sitting in the hot seat. When they were finished raking him over the coals, they left little for his imagination to decipher as to how they felt about him as a professor. He left the examination in total humiliation. Strangely enough, from then on, Pavel was admitted to his classes without even a mention of gifts. The end of chapter 9. One miracle after another. The Pavel Goya story.